Hello everyone, my name is Jason and I am an ISFP. You are watching my ISFP journey. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. I would ask that if you are not already subscribed, I ask that you would please do so. That would be great and I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much in advance for all of you who do take the time to subscribe. Today, I want to talk about the language that is used in the MBTI community of perceiving and judging. I think that these words cause a lot of confusion amongst people who are trying to understand personality type. So I want to give what I hope will be a little bit of clarity on this issue. When I really first started understanding personality type, the first explanations that I saw of the P being at the end of your type, so ISFP for me, or the J being at the end of your type, had to do, the first explanation that I received had to do with organizing your day. So the idea was that people whose personality type ends in a P did not like to pre-plan out their days, and people whose personality type ended in a J wanted to have a relatively systematic plan when they woke up every morning for how their day was going to go. Now, I think there probably is some truth to that. I mean, the reality is when we hear stereotypes, the reason they became stereotypes is because there is some truth behind them usually. And I think there is truth to the fact or to the idea that people who are Ps, right, IPs, EPs, that they do like to have a little more free form and free flowing day as opposed to everything being pre-scheduled. And I do think the IJs and EJs do feel a little bit more comfortable with a more scheduled day, but that's really not what that's all about. The other thing that I had trouble making heads or tails of when I first began understanding personality type was the whole concept of the J meaning judging. Okay, so right off the bat, that word lends itself to the idea that people who are IJs and EJs tend to be more judgmental. I think that that's how that word judging is typically interpreted. And that's not accurate really at all. So let me kind of explain to you, if you don't know, the significance of the P and the J. And let me also say that if you're not familiar with objective personality type, with that system, first of all, you would do well to become familiar with it, but they also have changed those words. So they're not changing the letter, combination. So an ISFP is still an ISFP, but when they're talking about the functions themselves, they use the word observer instead of perceiver, or observing instead of perceiving. And they use the word decider instead of judger, or deciding instead of judging. And their goal in changing those words was to make them more relatable and understandable to people so that the confusion that exists around the concepts of perceiving and judging could be dispelled, and a better word usage could be implemented for the purpose of understanding. But let me explain to you why those words, regardless of which words you want to use, why they are there and what their significance is. We have perceiving functions, right? The intuition functions and the sensing functions. Those are our perceiving functions, or as objective personality would call them, they are our observer functions. We have judging functions. The thinking functions and the feeling functions are judging functions. And again, objective personality would call them deciders or deciding functions. So when you have a P at the end of your type, so ISFP, INTP, ISTP, INFP, and then ENFP, ESFP, so on and so forth, right? If you have a P at the end of your type, all that means is that you extrovert your first perceiving function. Or another way of saying that would be your first perceiving function is going to be an extroverted one. So for me, I'm an ISFP. My first function is introverted feeling, but I have that P at the end that tells me that my first observer or perceiving function is going to be an extroverted function. Well, what is my second function? It is extroverted sensing. Sensing being a perceiving function, and it is extroverted. So the P at the end tells you that when you find my first perceiving function, it's going to be an extroverted one, okay? I extrovert my first perceiving function. That's what the P means. For an INFP, that's intuition. So an INFP's lead function is introverted feeling, but the second function is extroverted intuition. Intuition being a perceiving function, and because the P is at the end of that four-letter code, you know that their first perceiving function is going to be extroverted. So extroverted intuition. Now, when you go over to the EPs, it might be a little easier to track because they're going to extrovert their first perceiving function, and all of their first functions are going to be perceiving functions. So for the IPs, their first perceiving function is actually their second overall function. So ISFP, ISTP, their first perceiving function is extroverted sensing, but that's their second function. INFP, INTP, their first perceiving function is extroverted intuition, but it's their second overall function in their function stack. When we jump over to the EPs, ENFP, ENTP, their first perceiving function is intuition, and their first perceiving function is going to be extroverted. We know that because the P is at the end, so extroverted intuition, and their first function is extroverted intuition. So their very first function is that extroverted perceiving function. And if we were to go over to the ISFPs and ESFPs and ESTPs, their very first function is extroverted sensing. Again, with the P at the end, we know that their first perceiving function will be extroverted because the P is at the end. And so since their first perceiving function is sensing, their first perceiving function is extroverted sensing. And for them, it also happens to be their first overall function. Now, when we jump over to the IJs and the EJs, so we have the J at the end, what that tells us is that their first judging function will be extroverted. So for let's just take an ESTJ, all right? What is an ESTJ's first judging function? It's thinking. The T in ESTJ gives that away. So their first deciding or judging function will be thinking. And since they have a J at the end, it will be extroverted because the J tells us that they extrovert their first judging function. So therefore, their first judging function is extroverted thinking. And it just so happens on the ESTJ, that's also their first overall function. Now, if you were to jump over to the ISTJ, the J again would tell you that their first judging function will be extroverted. The fact that they have the T in the ISTJ, that tells you that their first judging function is thinking. So their first judging function will be extroverted thinking. However, it will not be their first overall function because they are an ISTJ. So their first overall function is going to be an introverted one. In that case, with the ISTJ, introverted sensing. Now, what's fascinating about this is that when you look at the people whose type ends in a P, we say that we will often say, or you will often hear it said, that they are perceivers because their type ends in a P. And with the J's, they'll often be called judgers because their type ends in a J. However, I think that is a little misleading. And if you really dig into objective personality type, whoops, I kicked my camera stand there, sorry. If you really dig into objective personality type, you're going to see why that can be a little misleading. So let's just take an IP myself, okay? I'm an IP, so I would be called a perceiver. My first function is introverted feeling, which is a judging function. So some would call me a judger, right? Because my first function is judging. My fourth function is judging, extroverted thinking. My two middle functions, extroverted sensing and introverted intuition, they're my perceiving functions, or as objective personality would call them, my observing functions. And so what's fascinating is I'm actually much more balanced on my perceiving functions than I am on my judging functions. So if you were to call me a judger because my lead function is a judging function, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of addicted to that judging function, but it's my perceiving functions that are actually more balanced because I have them in the middle. So they're kind of operating on a 60-40 principle, whereas my judging functions are operating on more of like a 90-10 principle, 90% introverted feeling, 10% extroverted thinking. I have to work much harder at cultivating my fourth function, my extroverted thinking, to bring balance to those judging functions. Whereas my sensing and intuition, my perceiving functions are far more balanced. Now, if we flip over to an EP, we might say, well, let's take an ESFP, right? We might say, well, the ESFP they've got that P at the end, so we're going to call them a perceiver. Okay, that's fine. So what's their first function? It's extroverted sensing. All right, so you might say, hey, their very first function is a perceiving function. They're a perceiver. Their type ends in a P. They're a perceiver, right? But what's interesting is while they're gung-ho on that perceiving of the sensory, that fourth function, introverted intuition, which is their other perceiving function, is actually not real strong. So they're kind of a 90-10 situation. They're all in on extroverted sensing, but they're weak on introverted intuition. So you call them a perceiver, but actually their perceiving ability is not that strong because they're putting all of their chips into one perceiving bucket, okay, which is extroverted sensing. But then you look at the ESFP and you say, okay, well, they have that introverted feeling second and that extroverted thinking third. They're actually relatively balanced on their judging functions, okay? So they're like a 60-10 in their judging. And so they're actually more balanced on the judging side and more imbalanced on the perceiving side. So do you call them a perceiver because their type ends in P? Do you call them a perceiver because their very first function is a perceiving function? Or would it make more sense to call them judgers because that's what they're really better at? They're really better at balancing their feeling and thinking, whereas I am much more unbalanced to the feeling side and sort of to the detriment of the thinking side to some extent. Anyway, these are all different ways of thinking about this. I love the way objective personality deals with it. They will adopt the fact that, like, I'm an ISFP. Not that I've had them type me, but I mean, if they were to type me as an ISFP, they would say, okay, yeah, that's fine. We can classify you as an ISFP. But what they're really more focused on is saying, I'm a single decider. I have this deciding function up at the top or judging function up at the top that is really strong, but that other judging function, which is my fourth function, not so strong. You're going to have to work on that. And I have worked on that. Or they might call me a single decider, or they might call me a double observer. In other words, because my perceiving functions or my observing functions, as they would call them, are in the middle, they're running at a 60-40 kind of a deal, and they're a lot stronger. So my observations of the world and my ability to make sense of the things that I observe is strong. But my ability to differentiate or to balance my feeling with my thinking, not as strong. That's something I have to put way more effort in. And you could go through any type and you could look at that, right? I mean, let's just take an ISTJ. Okay, so an ISTJ's first function is going to be introverted sensing. So they're going to be very imbalanced over to the introverted sensing world at the detriment of extroverted intuition. So really in the perceiving game or the observing game, they're going to be more imbalanced. But in the judging or deciding game where they have that, let's see, what would it be? Extroverted thinking, introverted feeling in the middle. And if I'm messing that up, forgive me, because I'm trying to think through it, and for some reason I'm having some trouble. But anyway, it's because I'm bad at extroverted thinking. That's why I'm having trouble. Anyway, but they've got those decider or judging functions in the middle, much more balanced, okay? And there are a lot of interesting ways that that comes out in us about the things that worry us, the things that we obsess over, the things that we can have happen to us and feel relatively like comfortable with and just go, oh, okay, it's no big deal, versus the things that really freak us out and make us worry and stress us, okay? So we get stressed and we have fears and we worry more in the areas where we are imbalanced than in the areas where we are balanced. And you can go over to the Objective Personality site and watch their videos and learn a lot more about that. But if you're wondering, what is this whole perceiving and judging thing all about? Well, this is just meant to be a small synopsis of what it's about, okay? Perceiving at the bottom, P at the bottom means you extrovert your first perceiving function. J at the bottom means you extrovert your first judging function, okay? So I hope that that was clear. I think it was. I hope it was. I hope it was helpful. Leave comments below if you're listening to this and you're like picking up where I might have left a gap. Leave comments below to fill in those gaps for anyone who may be learning about this for the first time. They may have watched my video, and if there's something I didn't say very clearly, then they could drop down to the comments and see, and you, the audience, can fill in the gaps for those people, okay? Thank you so much for watching. I do really appreciate it. I would appreciate it if you'd hit the like button. Also, if you would subscribe, again, that would be really cool. I think I just broke like 200 subscribers the other day, so I'm not sure exactly where I am at the moment, but somewhere over 200, which is awesome. I really appreciate all of you who have subscribed and all of you who are watching. Thank you so much, and have an awesome day. Bye now.